How do you make every dollar count in student ministry? Whether you're working on a tight budget or just looking for ways to save, today's episode is packed with practical tips to help you stretch your resources and still have an impact. On this episode of Student Ministry Connection, we'll dive into how you can maximize your student ministry budget, no matter how small it is. Welcome to Student Ministry Connection, a podcast for those who serve in student ministry and also want to connect and grow. My name is Steve Cullum. In addition to being a youth pastor myself for over 2 decades, I'm also a missionary with National Network of Youth Ministries, where I get to help youth leaders thrive and support you as you reach the next generation. In our last episode, we talked about the basics of budgeting for student ministry. So we talked about understanding your budget, prioritizing expenses, and planning ahead. Today, though, we're going to finish our 2-part finance mini-series, and we're going to take it a step further. Whether you've got a limited budget or you're simply looking for ways to save, this episode is all about maximizing your resources and doing ministry without breaking the bank. I know firsthand how challenging it can be to fund events, trips, and programs, especially if you're part-time or volunteer. But over the years, I've learned a few tricks, and I think they can help you stretch every dollar without sacrificing quality. So if you're looking to save money and still grow your ministry, you're in the right place. But before we dive into that, let's pause to thank the sponsor of this episode, who can also save you some money. Ministry can be complicated to navigate, especially when you're juggling multiple jobs, roles, or youth ministry gatherings. Student Ministry Connection believes that the best leaders are healthy leaders, leaders who are able to lead from a place of abundance rather than exhaustion. And that's why we believe in G-Shades Youth Ministry Curriculum. With the release of Season 6, G-Shades is your simple solution for a gospel-centered youth ministry. Season 6 includes a year's worth of volunteer training resources, parent training resources, outreach events, discipleship events, and even 2 camps. Their curriculum is laser-focused on helping students see themselves, God, and others through the lens of the gospel, and it shows up in every topic, series, and week. And you can amplify your reach with G-Shade's engaging video messages, whether it's sharing the videos with your digital audience, giving parents a full preview of the content beforehand, or sending them out the next day to catch students up who missed out. G-Shades allows you to extend your ministry's reach, and that's not to mention the benefits of your students hearing the gospel preached from different voices and perspectives. There are lots of great youth ministry curriculums out there, but G-Shades sets itself apart because of a strong focus on the gospel. I've been so impressed with Mike and his team as they've created an amazing gospel-centered curriculum. So head over to gshades.org to catch your first glimpse of G-Shades with a 4-week free trial. And when it's time to buy, you can use the offer code CONNECTION for 10% off their top-tier curriculum. G-Shades, seeing life through the lens of the gospel. You can find the link to G-Shades in our podcast show notes. So when we think of doing ministry on a small budget, I think back to a quote from Mark DeVries, who said in his book, Sustainable Youth Ministry, $1,000 to $1,500 a kid. The most controversial of all the normals. This rule of thumb suggests that a church that expects to have 100 youth involved on a weekly basis needs to have a budget in the neighborhood of $100,000, including the program budget, staff, salaries, and benefits. Does that seem like a lot to you? Well, when you start to account for salaries and all the other things, it does start to add up. But most of us are probably not anywhere close to that. And I know that small is a relative word, especially when we're thinking about budget. While some might say that a $2,000 budget is small, others would say it's extremely high. I've heard of program budgets that are $0 and then all the way over $55,000 at some of the larger, more affluent churches. And I'm sure that it gets even bigger at some of the multi-site megachurches. My friend Dan Navarro, who's been on the podcast several times, in his research through the Youth Pastor Compensation Report, shows budgets all over the place as well. I've been at some churches that have no budget at all, and I've been in some that have a $2,000 to $4,000 programming budget, and then I've also been at churches where I've had around $20,000 to $30,000. Having experience in multiple situations, I will say that more money doesn't always mean less problems. And in fact, I'm pretty sure the song says it the other way. It often just means more expense reports that I've had to fill out, which is never, ever fun. At one ministry, I had a budget that was $3,700, and I don't feel like we had to stop ministry at all. We were still able to do our weekly program, go on trips, do mission work, serve in our community, and students were growing in their relationship with God and reaching their friends. And I still came out under budget at the end of the year, only spending $3,000 of the $3,700. But statistically, I know the majority of youth pastors in America are either part-time or volunteer. I think that probably applies to around the world as well, which means that most of us are probably not working with a programming budget over 50 grand. However, even if we are, we all need to be good stewards of God's resources, not just frivolously spending, which means we can all grow in this area. So with that in mind, I have 15 different tips to help you save money in your ministry budget. So here's number 1. Prepare your budget. I know we talked about this in the last episode, but don't just wing it. Be aware of how much everything costs that you do throughout the year. Get an idea of how much everything will cost your church and do the best you can to budget that out. Even if you don't actually have a budget that the church has given you, create a budget. Map out how much you think you're going to spend on your ministry this year and try to stick with it as best as you can. Even if the church leadership isn't giving you money on a regular basis to do your ministry, you can still work within a budget. Number 2, prioritize. After you've created all the different things that you want to do throughout the year, begin to prioritize them. We talked about this on the last episode as well, but what are those things that you feel God says must happen? And what are those things that might not be as important if you don't have the money? If you're thinking about those things ahead of time, you can easily cut them throughout the year if you need to. Number 3, think small. People often say that to grow a church, you must think small. From a youth ministry perspective, this means we really need to focus on smaller events with our students in order to build deeper, more meaningful relationships with them. This will often require you to add more volunteers to your group, but really, thinking small doesn't necessarily mean you have to do small groups. It just means that every event doesn't have to be on a large scale. By doing more small events, it also cuts down on the overall expenses for the youth group. If you do have small groups, you can encourage those small group leaders to do events with their students and not just the entire youth group. You can go mini golfing, attend students' plays, or go to their graduations, sporting events. All these different things really create an opportunity for students to connect, and it's not going to cost a lot of money. So keep thinking small. Which brings us to number 4, think simple. Most of the things that we now can do at a church will not compete with other things that are out there. At one point, maybe if we had the big screens and the smoke and the lights and all that sort of thing, we could maybe out-entertain the world, but not so much anymore. So I would encourage you not to spend your money trying to do so. Instead, make your events and activities simple. Focus on creating environments where you can grow closer to God and to each other. And that doesn't always require lots and lots of money. Number 5 is purchase in bulk. Yes, I just told you to think small and to think simple, but sometimes there are things that we can buy in bulk in order to save money. If you have something that you're regularly buying and you have a store like a Sam's Club or a Costco near you, consider buying what you need in bulk in order to save some money. You can also find a lot on Amazon too, so in a way, this is a tip to also shop around and find the best deal. But many times, one of the best ways to save over time is to buy what you need in bulk. Number 6 is to partner with other churches. Yeah, you knew this was happening at some point that I was going to bring up networking because we are in this together. I work for NNYM. I believe in the church coming together, and you don't have to do this alone. So, what are some of those events that you might be able to pull together with another church in your area and actually save some cash? And maybe you're able to even make it a bigger event and more exciting because you partnered with other churches. Don't think you always have to do it alone. Number 7 is to delegate purchases. I hope nobody feels like your church or you as a leader need to absorb all the cost for youth events. But the truth is, I've talked with a lot of youth leaders out there who are paying things out of their pocket, and that's the world they're living in. And not only are you paying out of your own pocket, but a lot of times anything that has to do with the student ministry is coming out of that pocket. So let's use an example of food. If you have small groups in your youth group, consider alternating different groups to bring different food at different events. If you don't have small groups, maybe you could ask the girls to bring food at some events and have the boys bring food in the next event. There are a variety of ways to divide your youth group up so that the cost of food is evenly distributed. It allows students who are gifted in hospitality to use their gifts, lets them bake or cook or share their passion with other students. But it also allows students to learn how to serve others. At my current church, we have a meal every week, and most of the time, that doesn't come out of our budget. Families within the church are donating their time and money to make that meal happen. This concept doesn't only apply to food, but I think you get my point. So apply it to other areas of ministry as well, like your decorations, gifts, supplies. Think through all the different ways where you can delegate those purchases and get other people involved. Number 8, create it yourself. While a lot of times our first instinct is to go to the store and buy whatever you need, we now live in a DIY world. There are so many different ways to create those things ourselves and end up saving money in the end. And can I just say that if you don't have things like a Pinterest account or you're not familiar with that, you probably need to get one. Even though I'm not a huge fan of Pinterest, things like that are great ways to find DIY ideas that you can do with your small groups, with your youth group, and beyond. So consider making it yourself. Number 9, feel free to charge. I know a lot of youth leaders who feel like the church must take care of all the costs associated with everything that the student ministry does. And that often means, well, we don't have the money, so we can't do these things. It's okay to charge. Let me say that again. It's okay to charge. Families pay for school a lot of times. They pay for clubs that their students are involved in. They pay for sports all the time. So they shouldn't be shocked if they have to pay for a church event like a retreat or a camp or a mission trip. It's okay to charge. So that's another way that you can also save in your budget. But with that in mind, number 10 is to scholarship wisely. Over the years, I've had lots of different experiences with scholarships. While I never want money to be the thing that stands in the way of a student attending what could be a life-changing event, we also need to make sure that we don't completely empty the budget on frivolous scholarships. So, what I encourage you to do is set aside a budget for scholarships. And this can come from what the church gives you as a portion of the overall church budget, or it can be through donations that you get from your church over the years. But whatever it is, hopefully you have a scholarship budget that's set aside for students who can't afford to go to camps or other events. And then encourage those students to fill out an application and submit what they're able to give. So I encourage all youth leaders not to give out 100% scholarships. I think there needs to be a buy-in, but also encourage those students to do some fundraising on their own. If they can prove they've done that, then we agree to accept what they give and then take care of the rest. And when students begin to take some initiative on their own, and they're not just getting a free handout to take care of 100% of their camp or mission trip, all of a sudden they start to own it a little more. And they start to realize that they can raise some money and they can save some money and make things happen. And at some churches, I've even seen students ask for less and less scholarships because they've realized that they actually can do this a lot of times. Number 11 is write your own curriculum. Now, I know we had a fantastic sponsor, G Shades, that offers a great deal on curriculum, and we can even save you money on that. But if you have the time, consider writing your own curriculum. I also had another guest on the podcast back on episode 116 that you should check out. He's a bivocational youth pastor that wrote his own curriculum and is also giving it away for free. So make sure you check out episode 116 for that. But curriculum sometimes costs a lot of money. Like I said, G Shades does a really good job of keeping that cost low, and we can also save you money, but it's expensive sometimes. And sometimes your church doesn't have the money, no matter how inexpensive it is. And so if you have the space, or if you also want to reach out to awesome people like Caleb from episode 116, consider writing your own or using some that you can get for free. Number 12 is to simply don't underestimate the ask. There are a ton of people within your church and town who are ready to give. If you need something, don't just go out and buy it or rent it. Although that might be the easiest thing to do, make sure you ask first. This will take some planning. You need to be thinking ahead all the time, like we talked about earlier, but it's worth the ask. Plus, you're giving people a way to partner with your ministry. So be sure to ask first and not just jump to the conclusion that you have to go out and buy or rent. And with that in mind, number 13 is weigh the options of renting versus buying. Some things will be cheaper just to rent, but other things are cheaper to buy and have it where you can use it over and over and over again. There are so many different options of buying and renting, so if you don't feel comfortable making this decision, find others who can walk through this with you. But make sure you weigh those options every time. Number 14 is to serve together. Look for ways that you can bond your group closer without spending a dime. I don't know about your students, but our students get really excited about asking their friends to come serve alongside them. I was at one church where we took an annual Six Flags trip, and we had a decent showing every year. But when we went to a service project, we had students begging to bring their friends, and we saw more new people coming to those service projects than we did to our expensive amusement park trip. So look for ways that you can bring students together to grow without even spending a dime. And a lot of times that's a service project. And finally, number 15, fundraise when necessary. Fundraising events can help lower the cost for students to attend expensive events, such as mission trips. Fundraisers are helpful, but I'd encourage you not to fundraise for every major event. If your church doesn't have fundraising policies in place, it would be good to start that conversation so you have some guidelines to follow whenever you do choose to do a fundraiser. There are lots of fundraising ideas out there. With a simple Google search, you can find example after example after example of great fundraisers that will help with your group. But again, as I said in the last episode, I highly recommend event-based fundraisers or one-off fundraisers in addition to personal fundraising, just because I don't think selling candy bars and things like that really gives you a good return on your investment. And that brings us to the end of our list. So 15 different ways that I think we can save money in student ministry. But I'd also love to hear some ways that you've been able to save money in ministry. So please reach out to us on social media. You can find us on Twitter or X at StuMinConnect. That's STUMIN Connect. Or you can find us on Instagram at Student Ministry Connection, as well as Facebook at Student Ministry Connection. You can find me on almost all the social media platforms at Steve Cullum. That's STEVECULLUM. And we would love to hear from you about ways that you've been able to save money, or maybe you have a question and I could address it in a future episode or just talk to you directly as well. We'd love to hear from you. Beyond that, we would also love to have you subscribe on your favorite podcast app and to share this with other youth pastors and youth leaders that are out there. We really do strive to connect with each other and to grow as youth leaders. In fact, when we're connecting and we were growing, it helps us thrive as leaders, and more students are able to be reached with the gospel. So if you would like to help me in that endeavor, you can share this podcast with others. But also, if you want to support me in my ministry with National Network of Youth Ministries, you can do that in a couple different ways. One, you can join our prayer partnership team. You can find that link in the show notes. And also, you can join our financial partnership team. Again, that link is also in the show notes. All that support really allows me to do things like podcasts, training events, networks, and so much more. It's a huge blessing that I get to do this, and a large part of why I get to do that is because of your support. So thank you so much to everyone who's already joined on that prayer or financial partnership team. Before we go, I also want to thank our sponsor, G-Shades. If you're looking for a curriculum, be sure to check out gshades.org, and also be sure to use that promo code CONNECTION to save 10% off your order. G-Shades has been a longtime sponsor, and we're so grateful for their support of this podcast. Well, next episode is something I'm really excited about. We just brought on a new person to our national network team who has been in ministry for a really long time, and in fact, been at his church for a really long time, which is pretty rare. And I'm really excited to talk about longevity in ministry with him in this next episode. So again, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. And until next time, be sure to stay connected, and may God bless your ministry.